The night cracked open with a scream and the metallic click of a safety being released. A cold wind swept through the cul-de-sac, carrying the sharp smell of rain and gun oil. A porch light flickered once, illuminating the silver edge of a pistol aimed at a small boy in a wheelchair. The air trembled with silence before chaos swallowed it whole. That moment, the second her finger tightened, would divide my life into before and after, peace and fury, father and sheriff. Our house sat on the far edge of Maple Ridge, a neighborhood that sold itself as quiet, safe, picture perfect. White fences, manicured lawns, weekend barbecues. It looked like the kind of place where nothing bad could ever happen. That illusion lasted exactly 18 months. My wife, Linda, loved the small town calm. She said it felt like breathing again after years of city sirens. For me, peace meant I could come home, hang my badge on the hook, and just be dad. But even in peace, trouble has a way of finding you. Ethan was 12, born with cerebral palsy. He rolled through life with a smile stronger than most men's pride. His wheelchair was a sleek, blue model. His ride, he called it, covered in little police decals I'd stuck on to match my patrol car. Every morning before work, I'd tighten the straps on his gloves, pat his shoulder, and he'd grin up at me saying, "Go catch bad guys, Dad." His voice always had that spark, like he already knew the world wasn't built for him, but he'd roll through it anyway. Our street was calm until she moved in. Her name was Karen Dalton, though everyone just called her Miss Dalton with that cautious politeness you give a rattlesnake. She joined the HOA board within a week of buying her house. By month 2, she was sending out citations, too many trash cans visible, mailboxes painted the wrong shade of gray, flags hung improperly. The neighborhood nodded, obeyed, and whispered behind curtains. But she never liked Ethan's ramp, said it ruined the aesthetic. I'd thought she was joking until she filed a complaint about it. I still remember the smell of fresh paint the day I built that ramp, cedarwood warmed under a golden sun, the sound of Ethan's laughter echoing across the driveway. That ramp wasn't just a structure. It was independence. He called it my runway. Karen saw it as an eyesore. At first, I ignored her letters. I'd dealt with louder bullies in my life. But then she started showing up, clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes sharp like broken glass. "Regulations are regulations, Sheriff," she once said, smiling with a kind of venom that didn't belong behind white picket fences. I should have seen it, then, the rot beneath the perfect lawns. Still, I wanted peace. Linda begged me not to make enemies. "She's harmless," she'd said, "but harmless people don't keep notes on children." And when I found a folded letter shoved under our door, "Your son's ramp violates HOA standards. Remove it or face consequences," I knew something was breaking loose. That night, I sat in Ethan's room, watching the soft glow of his nightlight bounce off the blue wheels of his chair. I thought of the oath I'd sworn as sheriff to protect and serve, but I never imagined I'd need that oath for my own front yard. Trouble was circling, quiet, and patient, and I could feel it in the still air like the heaviness before a storm. Tell me where you're watching from. Karen's hostility didn't come all at once. It grew slow, like rust on a badge. At first, she hid it behind polite smiles and fake concern. She'd wave when we drove by, her nails glinting bright red in the sunlight, but her eyes stayed cold. I'd been in law enforcement long enough to recognize that kind of stare, the one that measures, catalogs, and judges. She watched everything. Every delivery truck that stopped by our house, every visitor, every morning I pushed Ethan's wheelchair down the ramp. The first incident happened in spring. Ethan was playing in the driveway, rolling his toy police car, a little black cruiser with chipped white paint, along the pavement. Karen crossed the street, arms folded, clipboard in hand. "Children shouldn't play in the driveway," she said, voice sharp as gravel. I smiled, keeping my tone even. "He's not hurting anyone." She looked at the toy car, then at Ethan's chair, and said quietly, "Rules are rules." Then she turned and walked away. Her perfume hung in the air, too sweet, almost suffocating, as she disappeared behind her perfect rose bushes. The letters came next. Every week, some new complaint, excessive noise from wheelchair use. Unauthorized ramp edition. Unapproved colors on front door. The last one made me laugh. Our door was beige. But the laughter didn't last. I noticed Ethan started avoiding going outside. She looks at me funny, he said once, eyes lowered. Like, I'm breaking something just by being here. I knelt beside him, feeling my badge press against my ribs. You've got every right to be here, son. You belong anywhere you roll. By summer, Karen had convinced the HOA board to fine us. $50 for the ramp. $100 for unsightly exterior modifications. I went to the next meeting, still in uniform, and stood at the back while she spoke to the board like a queen addressing servants. We must preserve the value of this community, she said. I raised my hand. You're fining a disabled child for accessibility, I said calmly. The room went silent. She smiled, lips tight. This isn't about disability, Sheriff. It's about order. Something changed in her after that meeting. I'd catch her taking photos of our house from across the street. One night, I saw her flashlight beam sweep over Ethan's ramp like she was inspecting it. I confronted her once, told her to stop harassing my family. She leaned close enough that I could smell her peppermint gum and whispered, "Maybe if you weren't wearing that badge, I'd remind you who runs this neighborhood." That was when I started documenting everything, every letter, every encounter, every overheard word. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was building a case without realizing it. By early autumn, tension crackled through the air like static. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Some quietly apologized, others looked the other way. But the quietest nights were the worst. I'd sit by the window, watching porch lights flicker across the cul-de-sac, feeling that deep police instinct crawling under my skin. I knew when danger was coming, I just didn't know it would arrive with the click of a trigger. It was a Saturday evening, the kind where the air feels heavy and strange, the kind that warns you something is about to go wrong. The sun had just slipped behind the rooftops, spilling a streak of orange light across the wet asphalt. Linda was inside making dinner. I was in the garage, half listening to the soft hum of the radio and the rhythmic creak of Ethan's wheels as he rolled up and down the ramp, practicing. He called it flight training. His laughter filled the dusk like music. Then came the voice. "Get off my property." Karen's words tore through the quiet like broken glass. I stepped out before my brain even caught up. She was standing on the sidewalk, pajama pants, slippers, a handgun clenched in her right hand. The porch light from her house cast a harsh, yellow glow across her face. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was something colder. Ethan froze halfway down the ramp, his little blue wheels glinting under the light. "Dad," his voice shook. I took one step forward, my badge still clipped to my belt, my hand raised, calm but ready. "Karen," I said, slow and deliberate, "put the gun down." My voice echoed off the quiet houses. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, then went silent. She pointed the barrel at Ethan's chest. The sound of my pulse drowned everything. I could smell the acrid tang of gun oil and the faint sweetness of Linda's lasagna drifting from the open window. Two worlds colliding, home and hell, in the space of a heartbeat. "He trespassed," she said. He rolled onto my grass. Her words were ice. Her hand trembled, but the gun didn't move. I felt my training kick in. I kept my tone steady. "He's a kid, Karen. On his ramp. You don't want to do this." I glanced toward Ethan, his hands gripping the wheels so tight his knuckles whitened. His police toy car had rolled from his lap and stopped in the gutter, its red light sticker catching the last glow of sunset. I shifted slightly, putting myself between her and my boy. Every instinct screamed at me to draw my own weapon, but the father in me was louder. "Karen," I said, "look at me. I'm the sheriff. I'm right here." For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Doubt, fear, maybe realization. But then she lifted her chin, and I heard the soft click of her finger pressing the trigger guard. "Please," Ethan whispered. That sound, his voice trembling through the cold air, cracked something in me. I stepped forward, ready to take the bullet if I had to, when a porch light flicked on across the street and a neighbor shouted, "What the hell's going on?" The distraction was enough. Karen flinched, her hand jerking upward. The gun fired once, a deafening crack that tore through the night and echoed off the rooftops. For one breath, everything went still. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Ethan was frozen, eyes wide, untouched but shaking. The bullet had struck the wooden post of his ramp, splintering it into sharp fragments. I rushed forward, scooping him into my arms as Linda screamed from the doorway. Karen stood there, pale, shaking, the gun now hanging limp at her side, eyes wide as if waking from a nightmare she'd created. Red and blue lights flooded the street minutes later, painting the white fences in chaos. But the image that stayed burned in my mind wasn't the gun or the lights. It was that little toy police car lying in the gutter, its cracked plastic wheels slowly spinning in the night breeze. The sirens arrived before I'd even processed the sound of the shot. Red and blue lights strobed across our walls, washing Ethan's face in alternating colors: fear, relief, disbelief. He clung to me so tightly I could feel the tremor in his small arms. Linda stood behind us, her hand over her mouth, mascara streaking down her cheeks. The air smelled of smoke, wet wood, and something bitter like the residue of rage. Deputies poured into the yard. I knew most of them by name. Their boots thudded against the pavement, their radios crackled. And then silence, the kind of silence that carries weight. I saw their eyes flick to my badge, then to the gun in Karen's shaking hand. "Drop it, ma'am," Deputy Hartman ordered, voice low but firm. She didn't resist. The weapon clattered onto the driveway with a hollow, metallic echo that still rings in my ears. Ethan was crying now, not from pain, but from the shock that cracks something deep inside a child. His toy police car was still lying near the curb, one wheel broken. I picked it up and held it in my palm, the plastic still warm from the bullet's heat. That tiny object became the line between the world I thought I knew and the one we were suddenly living in. Linda knelt beside Ethan, whispering, "It's over, baby. It's over." But it wasn't. I could feel it, because while the paramedics checked him for injuries and the officers took statements, Karen just stood there, no cuffs yet, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her, mumbling about trespassing and rules. Her voice trembled, but there was no remorse in it. When they finally led her to the cruiser, she turned her head slightly toward me. Our eyes met across the flashing chaos. Hers were wide and oddly calm, as if she believed she'd done something righteous. I wanted to shout, to demand why, but the words wouldn't come. My throat burned with something heavier than anger. It was betrayal by a system I'd spent my life upholding. A light drizzle began to fall, soaking the ramp where the bullet had lodged deep into the wood. The scent of wet cedar rose in the air. Ethan's blue wheelchair sat abandoned at the base of the ramp, one armrest splintered from the impact. I remember brushing my fingers over the mark and whispering, "You missed." Not as a taunt, but as a prayer. They took statements deep into the night. I gave mine through clenched teeth, my voice flat, detached, professional. The only way I knew how to survive that kind of moment. When they finally cleared the scene, the street looked like a storm had passed. The ramp, the scattered splinters, the broken toy car, all of it told a story no report could ever hold. By dawn, the flashing lights were gone, the neighbors back behind curtains. But I knew what waited ahead wasn't rest or healing. It was a war. One I'd never wanted, but one I couldn't walk away from. The morning after the shooting felt unreal, like waking in a stranger's house, wearing your own grief. The world outside still smelled of gunpowder and rain. Inside, the silence was too clean. Linda moved through the house like a shadow, her face pale and eyes swollen. Ethan wouldn't speak. He just sat in his chair, turning the broken toy police car over in his hands, the little red light sticker now half peeled away. That sound, the faint plastic click as the wheel spun, was all that filled the air. The county sent counselors, victim advocates, even a chaplain. I nodded through their words, said the right things, but none of it touched the storm inside me. My badge felt heavier than ever, its metal cold against my chest. I'd worn it for 2 decades, believing it stood for protection, justice, safety. Yet here we were, My son nearly killed outside his own home, and the shooter sleeping in a holding cell instead of a cage. The DA called that afternoon. We'll press charges, he said, but it might get complicated. HOA connections, witnesses, her attorney's already making noise. His voice was calm, almost detached. I stared at the bullet hole in the ramp, its edges burned black against the cedar. Make it simple then, I said. She pointed a gun at a child. He sighed. You know, it's never that simple, Sheriff. The line went dead, leaving nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of thunder. That night, Linda tried to get Ethan to sleep, but he wouldn't go near the window. She might come back, he whispered. I knelt beside his bed, the soft blue glow of his night light reflecting off the sheriff's star on his toy car. She won't, I said. I promise. But promises are fragile things. They break easy when truth gets in their way. When the house finally went quiet, I stepped outside. The ramp was slick with dew, the bullet hole dark and deep. I ran my fingers across it, feeling the groove where death had almost found its mark. The air was sharp with the scent of wet cedar and something electric, the hum of anger waiting to be shaped. I thought about every family that ever called for help and heard excuses instead of justice. About how often the law bends for those who hide behind it. I whispered to the night, I'll make this right. It wasn't a threat. It was a vow. Not as a sheriff, but as a father. From that moment, I stopped waiting for the system to protect us. I started preparing to hold it accountable. Every report, every photo, every witness statement. I collected it all, methodically, quietly, grief sharpened into purpose. I'd buried too many victims in my career. I wasn't about to let my son become another story whispered at town hall meetings. When I went back inside, Ethan was asleep, the broken toy still clutched in his hand. I leaned down, kissed his forehead, and saw my reflection in the wheelchair's chrome. For the first time in years, I didn't see a cop looking back. I saw a father ready to fight for his child, whatever it took. Detective Mark Ellison arrived 2 days later, crisp shirt, coffee in one hand, notebook in the other. He was young but sharp, the kind of investigator who noticed details others missed. When he stepped onto the driveway, his shoes crunched over the splintered wood from the ramp, and I saw his jaw tighten. Hell of a thing, Sheriff, he muttered, eyes scanning the bullet hole. We'll get her. I wanted to believe him. The faint scent of gasoline from his cruiser mixed with the wet cedar, grounding me in a moment that still didn't feel real. We sat in the living room while Ethan watched cartoons in the background, the volume turned low. Mark flipped through his file. She's claiming she felt threatened, he said. My blood ran hot. Threatened by what? A 12-year-old in a wheelchair? He sighed. She's got a neighbor who says Ethan rolled too close to her property line. HOA rules about boundaries. She's twisting it into self-defense. I clenched my hands until my knuckles went white. The badge on my belt suddenly felt like an ornament, not authority. Still, Mark wasn't the kind to back down. He promised to dig deeper. Over the next week, he interviewed neighbors, pulled security footage, combed through HOA meeting minutes. Every night, he'd call me with updates, short, clipped, professional. Got her gun registered. Legal. But she never reported threats. No sign of forced trespassing. She's been documenting your family for months. That last one made my stomach turn. When he showed me the photos Karen had taken, zoomed shots of Ethan on the ramp, Linda watering plants, even me coming home in uniform, I felt something cold twist inside. It wasn't just harassment. It was obsession. Mark looked at me over the file and said, quietly, she's been building a narrative. You're the abusive authority figure. Your son's the symbol of defiance. I couldn't breathe for a moment. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a campaign. The DA met with us at the station that Friday. He laid out the preliminary charge, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. It sounded strong on paper, but I could already see the cracks forming. Karen's lawyer was claiming mental distress, citing harassment from law enforcement families. Her defense was painting her as the victim of a power imbalance. The irony was poison in my throat. Ethan was quieter now. He didn't want to go outside. The ramp sat unrepaired, that bullet hole gaping like a wound we all avoided. Linda tried to patch it once, but I stopped her. "Leave it," I said. "Let them see what she did." A week later, Mark called again, his voice tighter than usual. "We've got security footage," he said. "Neighbor's door cam caught the whole thing." I felt hope flicker, brief and blinding. "You're sure?" He hesitated. "It's grainy, but yeah." Shows her raising the gun. "Audio's bad, though." It was enough to move forward. They filed the case. The courthouse date set. Karen pleaded not guilty. The community split in two, half whispering sympathy for a troubled neighbor, half demanding justice. But I didn't care about public opinion anymore. The night before the first hearing, I stood on the porch under the flickering streetlight. I could smell cut grass, damp earth, and the faint trace of oil from the repaired patrol car. I looked at the ramp, at that scar in the wood, and felt my jaw tighten. Tomorrow, the uniforms and titles wouldn't matter. I wasn't showing up as sheriff. I was showing up as Ethan's father, the man who'd watched death reach for his son and lived to pull him back. The trial hadn't even started when the story exploded. News vans lined Maple Ridge like vultures on a wire, their satellite dishes glinting under the morning sun. Reporters leaned over my fence, shouting questions through microphones that smelled faintly of coffee and hairspray. "Sheriff, is it true you're using your position to influence the case? Did your son provoke the confrontation?" I ignored them all, keeping my face stone still. But inside, I was burning. The world wasn't interested in the truth. It wanted a spectacle. Karen became their headline darling. Local woman defends herself from powerful sheriff's family. She didn't need to say much. Her lawyer did it for her. He stood on her lawn one morning during a live broadcast, his tie whipping in the wind, saying, "My client acted out of fear. She was threatened by a man in power and a community that turned against her." Behind him, Karen stood in soft pink, clutching a Bible like a prop. The camera zoomed in just as she wiped a tear. The public ate it up. Linda stopped watching the news after that. I could still hear the faint hum of the TV from the other room, but she'd mute it whenever Ethan entered. He didn't need to see them talk about his incident like it was some local gossip piece. He already knew too much. I caught him one afternoon by the ramp, his hand resting over the bullet hole. "Dad," he said softly, "why do people think she's the one who got hurt?" I didn't have an answer. The smell of freshly cut grass filled the air, thick and green, but it couldn't mask the rot underneath. Detective Ellison kept working, but even he looked tired. Media pressures shifting everything, he admitted. "The DA's office is getting calls. HOA boards backing her. Some of them are saying you intimidated her with your badge." I laughed, short, bitter, hollow. Intimidated? She aimed a gun at a child. He nodded, rubbing his eyes. "I know. But perception, Sheriff, perception wins courtrooms." We hired an attorney, a steady man named David Keene, who'd worked civil rights cases before. He told us, "This is going to be ugly. They'll drag your name, your badge, maybe even your son's story through the mud. You sure you want to fight this publicly?" I looked at Ethan, who sat nearby, tracing the outline of his toy car with his finger. "We already are," I said. The first press conference came a week later. I didn't want it, but David said silence looked like guilt. I stood before a sea of flashing cameras outside the courthouse, the heat of the lights baking through my jacket. "This case isn't about rank or power," I said. "It's about accountability. A child was nearly killed. That's the truth." My voice stayed steady, though my throat burned. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught a flash of red, Karen's lawyer watching, smirking. That night, talk shows debated our story. Was the sheriff's presence intimidating? Did Karen act in fear or malice? I muted the screen. Outside, the crickets sang and a police siren wailed in the distance. I thought about how easily justice got twisted when money and headlines entered the room. In the quiet that followed, Linda sat beside me on the couch. "Do you ever wish we'd never moved here?" she asked. I looked toward the ramp visible through the window, the pale would now dull under moonlight. "No," I said finally. "I just wish people cared about the truth as much as the noise." The next morning, the summons arrived, court date confirmed. Trial in 2 weeks. Everything we'd held in was about to be laid bare. And I knew then, the fight wasn't just against Karen. It was against the story she'd built, one lie at a time, until half the town believed her. The courthouse smelled like paper, old wood, and coffee left too long on a burner. I'd walked those halls 100 times in uniform, but never like this, not as a father fighting for his son. The walls seemed narrower, the fluorescent lights harsher. Reporters clustered near the entrance, whispering as we passed. Ethan gripped my hand the whole way, his small fingers pressing into mine with quiet trust. He wore his Sunday shirt, blue like his chair, and kept his eyes on the floor. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled, neighbors, HOA board members, curious locals. Karen sat at the defense table, hair pinned neatly, dressed in white like she was auditioning for innocence. Her lawyer, Martin Greer, leaned close, whispering, while she nodded solemnly. I watched her avoid my gaze. She hadn't once looked at Ethan. The color drained from my knuckles as I held the railing before sitting. Judge Rollins entered, and the room rose. The gavel cracked like thunder. Court is now in session. The state of Washington versus Karen Dalton. The sound echoed, deep and final. I exhaled slowly, the scent of lemon polish rising from a wooden bench in front of me. This was it. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Julia Moreno, opened first. Her voice was clear, measured, every word slicing clean. This is not a story of fear. It is a story of control. The defendant pointed a loaded firearm at a disabled child on his own property. She did so deliberately with intent to intimidate. She paused, eyes sweeping the jury. The evidence will show she acted not out of panic, but out of prejudice. I saw jurors shift in their seats. One older man rubbed his chin. A young woman scribbled notes furiously. Across the aisle, Karen sat motionless, her eyes distant, as though she were somewhere else entirely. Then came the witnesses. Deputy Hartman took the stand first, describing the night in steady, practiced words. When I arrived, the defendant was holding the weapon, still loaded. The sheriff's son appeared shaken, but unharmed. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. Hartman's tone was factual, but when he said Ethan's name, something flickered in his eyes. Respect, maybe pity. Next was the neighbor whose porch light had saved us. He looked nervous, clutching his cap in both hands. I heard shouting, he said, then a shot. I saw her arm lift before it went off. He swallowed hard. That boy didn't do nothing wrong. Just sitting there in his chair. The sound of that word, chair, seemed to hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. I glanced at Ethan, who stared down at his lap, his thumb rubbing the chipped sticker on his toy, police car. Julia then presented the grainy doorcam footage. The lights dimmed, and the projector flickered to life. On screen, our quiet street appeared ghostly under the porch lights. The figures were small, blurred, but you could see it. Karen raising her arm, the muzzle flash, the recoil. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Julia turned to the jury. That's not fear. That's choice. Karen's lawyer objected, speculation, but the judge overruled him. The image froze mid-flash, that split second where time itself seemed to catch its breath. When Julia rested her case, the room felt colder. The jurors looked shaken. The evidence was there, visual, visceral. I wanted to believe it was enough. But I'd seen enough courtrooms to know evidence and truth weren't the same thing. Before adjourning, Judge Rollins asked if I wanted to give a statement as both witness and father. I hesitated, then stood. My voice came out lower than I expected. She didn't just point a gun at my son. She pointed it at every parent who thinks their home is safe. The words trembled, but stayed firm. I've seen evil in this job. It usually hides in darkness. This one waved from across the street. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft creak of Ethan's wheelchair. Then the judge nodded. We reconvened tomorrow for the defense. As the gavel struck, the sound echoed like a heartbeat fading into the dark. The first round was over, but I knew the real storm hadn't even started. Day 2 began under gray skies, the kind that pressed low enough to touch. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, and camera flashes cut through the mist like lightning. Reporters shouted questions again, but their words blurred into the static in my head. Inside, the courtroom smelled of damp coats and tension. Everyone could feel it. Today was her turn. Karen sat straighter this time, confidence blooming like poison ivy. Her lawyer, Greer, opened with a soft smile and a voice meant to sound reasonable. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "this isn't about hate. It's about fear." A frightened woman faced an armed lawman who used his badge to intimidate her. He let that sink in. A single mother, alone against authority. The narrative was clever, almost rehearsed. He called Karen to the stand. She took a slow breath before speaking, eyes glistening, hands folded in her lap like a saint in a painting. "I thought they were threatening me," she said, her voice trembling at all the right places. "They were shouting. I saw a gun, I panicked. I'm not a violent person. I've lived in that neighborhood for 12 years. I've never hurt anyone. It was a performance." Every pause, every tear felt placed. She even looked toward the jury before saying, "I didn't even know the boy was disabled until later." A lie. Everyone in that neighborhood knew Ethan's chair. It was bright blue, the one he'd proudly painted with stickers of planets and stars. Julia, our prosecutor, rose for cross-examination. Her tone was calm, but sharp. "Ms. Dalton, do you recall filing 6 complaints about the ramp built on the sheriff's property?" Karen shifted. "Yes, and in those complaints you referred to it as an eyesore and claimed it violated HOA standards. Is that correct?" "Yes." "So you knew who lived there." Karen hesitated. The silence in the room turned brittle. Julia leaned forward. "Ms. Dalton, did you or did you not point a loaded weapon at a child sitting in that ramp?" Karen's eyes darted toward the jury. I thought they were trespassing." "On their own property?" Greer objected, badgering the witness. The judge sustained. Karen exhaled shakily, clutching her tissue like a lifeline. But the damage was done. The jurors had seen it. The hesitation. The crack. Then came the twist. Greer produced a printed photo, grainy, zoomed, of me standing near Ethan after the shooting, my hand on my holster. "This," he said, pacing slowly, "is what my client saw. A man in uniform reaching for his gun." Murmurs rippled through the room. Can any of us say we wouldn't have reacted the same? It was a gut punch. I could feel every eye turned toward me. Julia objected, but the image was already burned into their minds. It didn't matter that I never drew my weapon. Fear had a way of rewriting truth. By recess, I sat outside the courtroom, staring at the rain streaking down the tall windows. Linda joined me quietly. Her eyes were tired, red from holding back too much. "She's winning them," she whispered. I didn't answer. I could feel it too, the tide shifting, inch by inch. When court resumed, Greer leaned into his closing argument like a practiced actor. "This case isn't about malice," he said. "It's about survival. My client was scared. She made a mistake, yes, but not a crime." His tone softened, almost fatherly. "Haven't we all reacted out of fear?" Julia's rebuttal came short, but fierce. Fear doesn't load a gun. Fear doesn't pull a trigger aimed at a child. Her voice carried like steel through the quiet room. "That's not fear. That's choice." The judge adjourned for the day, the verdict to be decided tomorrow. As we walked out, the crowd parted like waves, half looking at me with sympathy, the other half with suspicion. Ethan held my hand tighter than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. The sound of rain on the roof reminded me of that night, the flash, the scream, the shot that missed by inches. Somewhere in town, Karen was probably resting easy, confident in her performance. But I knew something she didn't. Morning would bring judgment, and judgment had a way of stripping away masks. The courtroom was colder that morning, not from the air, but from what everyone felt crawling under their skin, the end. The jury filed in, faces carved from stone, no eyes giving anything away. The clock ticked louder than usual, each second landing like a hammer. My palms were damp. Linda's hand trembled in mine, her skin cool against my own. Ethan sat beside us, silent, staring at the floor where his toy car rested by his foot, blue paint chipped, one wheel missing. The judge's gavel struck once. Has the jury reached a verdict? The foreman, an older man with gray hair and steady hands, stood. "We have, Your Honor." He handed over the folded slip of paper. That paper, so small, so weightless, could decide everything. I tried not to breathe as the judge unfolded it. On the charge of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, the pause stretched until it hurt. We find the defendant, Karen Dalton, not guilty. The words hit harder than the gunshot ever did. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Karen sobbed, loud, shaking, collapsing into her lawyer's arms. Cameras flashed like fireworks behind me. The smell of old wood and cheap perfume mixed into something sickening. I stared at her as she whispered, "Thank God," over and over, her voice trembling with fake relief. Linda let out a soft cry, almost a whimper. Ethan just looked up at me, eyes wide, confused. "Dad, she's free." His voice cracked. I couldn't speak. I just nodded once, slow. My throat was too tight for words. In my mind, I saw flashes, me standing over her porch, badge glinting in the sun, her face pale, when she opened the door. The fantasy of it was quick, violent, satisfying, the idea of making her feel what fear really was, but it vanished as fast as it came, because I knew what that would make me, and what my son would see. Reporters swarmed as we left the courthouse, shouting questions that blurred into noise. "Sheriff, do you agree with the verdict? Will you appeal? Was justice served?" I didn't answer. The sun was bright, cruelly so, and the sound of camera shutters followed me down the steps like snapping bones. At the bottom, I paused. Karen was surrounded by supporters, HOA members, neighbors who once smiled at us across the fence. She glanced at me just once, her expression smug beneath a mask of tears. And then she turned away, walking free. Back home, the house felt emptier than before. The ramp was silent. The air still smelled faintly of cleaning polish and rain-soaked wood. Ethan rolled his toy car up the ramp, slowly, mechanically, like he was trying to fix something inside himself. "It's okay, buddy," I said quietly, though I didn't believe it. That night, I sat in the dark living room, staring at the badge on the table. The metal gleamed faintly in the lamplight, the same badge that once meant something: protection, law, order. Now it felt heavier, almost mocking. I thought about turning it in, walking away, but something stopped me. The sound of Ethan's laughter, faint, fragile, came from down the hall as Linda read him a story. That sound grounded me, reminded me why I wore the badge in the first place. It wasn't for authority. It was for people who couldn't stand on their own. For kids like him. Outside, crickets sang under a wide, indifferent moon. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise, not of revenge, but of purpose. She might have walked free today, but the system that let her do it, that was where I'd aim next. After the verdict, the numbness turned into work. Grief hardened into an agenda I could hold in both hands. I started small, meetings with the DA, late nights drafting proposals, calls to lawmakers who listened with polite faces and slow promises. I met with parents at school functions, fathers and mothers who crossed their arms and said they feared the same thing could happen to their children. We formed a coalition, neighbors who'd stayed silent, veterans who knew how to stand their ground, disability advocates who had long felt ignored. I used my credibility as a sheriff like a tool, not a shield, offering what leverage I had to push for clearer statutes on reckless use of weapons near vulnerable persons. The first bill we drafted was narrow and specific: enhanced penalties for brandishing a firearm at a child or a visibly disabled person, written in plain language to prevent loopholes. I sat through hearings, watched committee members fidget, and testified not as a man in uniform, but as a father who'd watched a muzzle aim at his son. I kept my voice steady. I kept my facts cleaner than my grief. We held vigils that winter on the courthouse steps, families clutching candles and homemade signs, and I found that public pressure moved things in ways private fury could not. We met with HOA boards and pushed for mandatory de-escalation training for neighborhood officers and community liaisons. We worked with local schools to train kids and parents on recognizing harassment, reporting procedures, and rights when confronted. It was all tedious procedural work, phone trees, red tape, and late night edits, but each small victory felt like a board nailed into place on a larger structure: prevention. Along the way, Linda started a support group for families with disabled children. She organized resource nights, therapy referrals, and fundraisers to retrofit homes for accessibility. Ethan, in his quiet way, became a face of the campaign. He met lawmakers in the Capitol Rotunda, grinning as if he were on another kind of parade. People sent checks and letters. They sent stories of their own near misses. We compiled them into a dossier and took it to the state attorney general. We lost some early votes. We won some. The opposition played sympathy like a shield, but evidence, compiled affidavits, doorcam footage, expert testimony from disability rights lawyers, kept chipping at the wall. Throughout, I balanced being a public figure and a private man. I still tucked Ethan in at night, still tightened his glove straps, still listened when he wanted to talk about school. I learned to lean into vulnerability in a way I'd never allowed on patrol. I spoke on panels about systemic failures without naming individual jurors or offering legal advice. I asked questions that mattered. How do we protect children in their own yards? How do communities guard against obsessive neighbors cloaked in civility? We launched a small nonprofit focused on education and legal aid for families facing harassment. It doesn't fix everything, and it won't bring back the certainty we once had, but it creates options where there were none. The final image I carry is simple and small. At the office on my desk, under a lamp, sits Ethan's cracked toy police car. It's blue plastic scuffed by life, its red sticker half peeling, and every time I look at it, I remember why this work began. If you believe children deserve safer streets, subscribe and help fund the Ethan Justice Project.